an insurer and compare it to the banks, compare it to Anglo American, compare it to MTN. Yes, it's different businesses and different underpinnings, but the concepts around what your top line revenue is trying to achieve are at least a line between everyone.
It's really important. It's really important.
Exactly.
I think one thing we spoke about briefly before we started recording was talking to the difference between being in consultancy and being in corporate. And I think students often, that's the sort of crossroads they meet when they're at the end of their studies to say, which one of these two roads should I take? And if I take one road, does it preclude me from kind of, transitioning over? And you've worked in both spaces.
I have.
So will you please speak to sort of your experience of each of those and maybe the pros and cons, I don't think necessarily advising which one is better, but speaking to your experience in each of them and what you gained from each of them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but I mean, very important. I think a lot of this is down to individual and their preferences. I can tell you now. I loved going into consulting at first.
Yes,
it was great. I was also in a position to, as we discussed earlier, where I only had 2 exams. 2 exams left, so I knew that I could knock those off quite quickly. And then the fast-paced, energetic but exciting side of consulting. So what I mentioned earlier, where you're advising lots of different companies. Okay? That can be great if you're in a position where you can do that and you can focus on that and your exams are behind.
Yes.
I find, not to say that you can't go into consulting if your exam progress is slightly slower, but it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And to be open and honest with your manager about, to start off with, that look, you are there, you are hardworking. But, the time commitment that can come from consulting.
And the long hours.
Exactly. And the long hours. And it's not so much long hours, 365 days of the year.
No.
It's just a little bit more up and down. It's in pockets.
It's like hotspots.
Exactly. There's hotspots of the year where you're now auditing Sunman and Discovery. Their year-ends are at the same time.
Yeah.
And teams are working across both. It can be incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
But, then after that, there might be a little bit of a dip where you have a chance to reflect internally as a team and to kind of say, well, how do we build for the next phase?
Yeah.
So it's just, I don't know if volatile is the right word, but it's a little bit
dynamic.
Yeah, it's a little more dynamic and fluid in that nature. And I think depending on one's personality, you can actually thrive in that environment.
Yeah.
And I certainly felt that I did it. And it was one of the reasons why I went into it to begin with.
Yeah.
I think what is also nice from that perspective is you don't always necessarily know what you enjoy. So yes,
and consultancy gives you often a breadth.
Exactly. So it gives you often a breadth of exposure, which helps you to understand what you enjoy. I think the con with that is then, you can sometimes feel a little bit like the jack of all trades.
Master of none.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sort of that kind of thing, depending on how your career unfolds and what you do or don't get involved in, what you do or don't get exposed to. So I would say to guys, I love consulting, but it was because, I did it for me, but I also took it very seriously in terms of understanding where I was at, constantly checking in with my manager, making sure that I get the right exposure.
Yeah.
I think it can be quite easy to, just kind of fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own career and your own development. And yes, exams are important, but at the same time, you don't want to kind of, after 3-4 years of work, look up and go, sure, actually, exactly that. I haven't actually built a kind of in-depth knowledge of many things. I've worked on lots of different stuff, but if you compare that to the corporate side, you'll then have, like I did, so after 4 years of working consulting, I then transitioned into corporate, and there what you've got is a slightly more stable environment. There are still hotspots through the year, depending on. So if you happen to work at valuations, your year ends are tight, and it's hard time commitments. If you're working at pricing or product development, there's certain times of the year it's your product launch. There's always going to be those
periods of time that exactly.
You're gonna have to ramp it up and ramp it down. That's never not going to be the case.
Yeah.
I think that from a corporate perspective, from very early on, you can get that depth of knowledge.
Yeah, you can become a specialist quite quickly.
You can become a specialist quite quickly, and I think you can actually transition from what you've learned in undergraduate and even honors. You can actually transition quite quickly into the working world in a practical sense.
Yes.
Opening up a valuation model, seeing how the life tables are calculated and how the QX rates are applied. You won't necessarily get that exposure in consulting, because in consulting, for a large part, that's already been set up, and now you're kind of running with something.
Yes.
Right? So it's okay, cool, there's a variation to be done.
Or you're checking a model.
Or you're checking a model, or you're reperforming it, or you're auditing someone else's in-depth calculation.
Yeah.
There's time and constraints around that, so you might not have you might have the ability to go and open up and rebuild the model from scratch because just time and budget weren't enough. Whereas in the corporate side, I find that particularly early on, for some personalities, if they want to get that depth of knowledge quickly, it's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Because you'll be able to take it, practically apply it, into a corporate setting. You'll be able to open up. I mean, we use profit as like our valuation.
Yeah.
You'll be able to open up profit and go to physically look and say, oh, okay, no, that's how that's calculated. That's how it's calculated. You'll have a little bit more time because it's not so much time and materials based. It's more, you as a person and exactly what you want to work on.
Yeah.
I think also, I mean, one of the other advantages with corporate that I've found over the years is, particularly big and sizable corporates, there's different roles that you can take on.
Yes.
So, I mean, also being in university, I sometimes find that, guys say, but is it going to be very like one dimensional? So almost don't think of corporate consulting as this incredibly flexible, work on lots of different things, and corporate is, I'm doing one thing for the rest of my life. That's not necessarily the case. At the end of the day, it's also important for you to keep open honest with your manager about what you are working, what you would like to work on.
And your career goals.
Your career goals. I think, it's amazing. Yes, there might be one big team, but you can go and work on the model development side of that team.
Yeah.
You can then go and work at the experience investigation side. It's one big team that's managed by one big chief actuary, but it's multidisciplinary. And then there's lots of different ways to see a very similar problem statement but from very different angles. You can then go and work on the capital side. So it's the same product set, but now you go into determining the capital and the natural solvency capital requirements on those products. So that's what I'm saying, where you take something, you can become an expert in it, and you can see it from lots of different lenses quite quickly. 3-4 years into work, you can have a very, very specialized knowledge of product sets and just in way of how the calculations work.
I think something in the corporate space, which I also say to my students, is if you do feel like you're getting stuck in a role, you do have agency. Exactly. In the sense that, like, have a conversation with the powers that be and say, this is what I want, or think of moving. Like, just because you could feel stuck in a rut doesn't mean you have to stay there.
But I always think, like, if you're stuck in a rut a little bit, what are you doing about it to change that? And even such a manager, some people say, oh, but like, it's my manager. There's different ways and shapes. So, a lot of the companies have like actual development programs.
Exactly, tap into that.
People who they're not actually actuaries. They just understand the profession and they're there to guide people through their actual studies. You can reach out to them. They're actually often more aware about roles that exist throughout the entire group than what you would ever be.
Exactly.
So a little bit with that, it's like, I understand it, but at the same time, my first question is, okay, well, what are you
doing? Yeah, exactly. And I think also maybe just an encouragement to listeners is that you do have to take responsibility for your own career. As much as a manager can be fantastic, and I've had some fantastic managers in my time, no one is going to care about your career as much as you.
Exactly.
And they're also the one who has to
make your wife.
But I think also one thing I saw in consulting, only having been in it for a year, and I don't know if you can attest to this as well, is you also build up very interesting networks because you're engaging with different clients. And so a lot of the connections I have in the actuarial space are actually based on the project that I did when I was in consultancy, because every couple of weeks you're changing, and you're engaging with new actuaries, etc., which I think is a very positive thing.
It is. It is very positive. I think on the flip side of that, you can also get that in corporate. So for example, now for the IFRS17 project,
of course.
And it doesn't have to be just because of a big implementation. It can be lots of different things. There are lots of like industry forums, you as insurers are meeting at. So yes, we've got the Churro Convention once a year. That's one event. There's lots of different, like we've got the LAC, the Life Assurance Committee. There's lots of different LAC meetings throughout the year where you as industry participants, go there, present, talk about areas, talk about topics, and that's an opportunity again for you to meet people and build relationships. So yes, maybe it comes a bit more easily or freely in consulting. But there's definitely still those opportunities to do it outside of that, if it's something that you
want to do. Yeah. So I think as we near the end of our podcast, something I always ask my guests is, what is a piece of advice or encouragement that we give to an aspiring actuary? Also remembering that you were once in their shoes, so maybe something you would have liked to hear when you were in that space.
There's lots.
Say them all.
I think I think for me, first acknowledge that it is a long journey.
Yeah.
It is difficult. You aren't in it alone. I think that's the thing that I think the hardest thing for people to kind of realize, and by people I mean people studying actuarial science, is for the most part, you kind of flew through school. You were the person that everyone came to.
Yeah, you were topped up.
Exactly, you were topped up. You got the highest mark for maths. You were the know-it-all. The reality is, you now take all of those top dogs from around the country, put them through a degree, and the reality is that you're not necessarily going to be the top dog coming out of it, and you don't necessarily want to be. It depends. I think for me, the biggest thing is actually just to use one another and to leverage off one another and to almost see it as it is a very, very long journey. But the reality is, I'm still in deep contact with people who are studied in university.
Yeah, me as well.
And not everyone, of course, that's not possible.
Yeah.
But the switch that needs to happen is for people to realize that I'm not doing this by myself. You don't have to go and sit in the library
By yourself. Yeah.
It's because you think that you're capable and smart enough to do this by yourself, but you always have been able to.
Yeah, that's your thing. Yeah.
It's slightly different when you go into such a difficult degree, and almost practice that early on. Practice actually speaking to other people, getting their views, getting their insights, because by the time you get to honours, and by the time you get to the working world, and by the time you write fellowship, to be honest with you, one of the only ways to actually develop and progress and to even pass something like fellowship is to get challenged and to speak to lots of different people.
And have conversations and the inputs, yeah.
To get those inputs. You can't do this alone.
You're right.
It's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I do wonder what the consequences of that are in the longer term.
Well, also just think from like a mental health perspective.
Exactly.
I don't think any person is an island, and I think it can be very isolating and outside, because the reality of it is you do have to master a lot of things alone.
Exactly.
There's a lot of time you have to spend alone. Like my desk has probably spent more time with me than some of the people in my family. Like, this is the reality of it. But knowing that there's other people doing it with you, and then other people who can, send you how they got to an answer and kind of explain their rationale and that sort of thing. There's also efficiencies, I think, that come from that.
Yeah, so
not just a camaraderie, there is actually genuine efficiencies.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a balance. It's not, don't kind of meet up every week and just have chit chats.
Yeah.
There's a certain healthy way to go about
like
it.
partnering.
Yeah, exactly. You partner through it. So an example, a lot of the guys who write fellowship, what they do is they'll answer questions independently and give it to one another to mark.
Yes.
And to get that input on. And it's invaluable. It's like, okay, but what did you mean by this point?
Yes.
Why did you approach to this angle? And just the learning that comes from that is tenfold what you could have done by yourself.
Exactly.
Obviously, make sure that you understand the concepts, like you say, in your own time.
Yes.
But particularly as you get further and further along that road journey, you just realize how much more important it is to speak to lots of different people, to speak to people who are specializing in this, specializing in that.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of different areas of specialization.
Yeah.
I think, look, it's not something that I battled with initially that much. As I've seen it from the other lens, I just think if it was one thing that I think people should really focus on is not secluding yourself, or not necessarily just thinking, well, I can do this, I can do it by myself.
Yeah.
You can. And you probably will, because everyone has the willpower and can get through it. But I think it's just really the healthiest way to go about it.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. But thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I think that was really, really helpful.
That flew by.
I know, it did. But thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for your time.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review on your preferred streaming platform. If you'd like to interact with us more, or add questions or topics to our pool of ideas, please follow our Instagram page at AsForActuary, or email us on asforactuary@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Take care.